Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to all of those who have joined quite promptly. Thank you once again for previously registering to our webinar, and in this case, for also attending this afternoon's little webinar, starting off with our first Primal Pictures student webinar, where we hope to unleash your potential for both the likes of anatomy and physiology using Primal Pictures. For those of you who I haven't met before, or for those of you who might be returning, my name is Nadir, and I am both an anatomist as well as a member of the Learning Curve and Primal Pictures family. Now, I completely understand that anatomy and physiology aren't exactly two subjects that many students enjoy, and some of you might have a bit of a love-hate relationship with these subjects. However, that's why I'm here today to show you how you're able to maximize your understanding for these two subjects, as well as make this content more memorable and relatable through the use of Primal Pictures. Now, starting off with today's little presentation, we'll keep things nice and simple by briefly exploring what Primal Pictures is before focusing on how to access and navigate the platform, both on campus as well as off campus. We'll also discuss the two apps through the two different titles available to you, which can be accessed offline. We'll then perform a title deep dive by exploring three different titles, starting off with anatomy and physiology, heading over to 3D real time, and lastly, finishing things off with quizzing. Now, I just want you to also note that you will receive a recording of the session for you to review at a later stage. And also, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to pop them over in the chat box. And towards the end, we'll have a bit of a short Q&A. For those of you who aren't too familiar with Primal Pictures, Primal serves as the world's leading digital resource for anatomy and physiology globally. Now, I've been in your shoes as a student, struggling to understand how to make anatomy more relatable and fun for myself. And that's where developing concrete study strategies through the use of a guided learning experience is quite important. And that's where Primal Pictures comes into play. By serving as your go-to guide to help advance your learning experience for these two subjects can be quite crucial. Now, the main standout feature about Primal Pictures is that every single one of the interactive 3D models has been sourced from real scan data. And that's to ensure the greatest representation of both medical accuracy as well as clinical relevance through the use of a digital resource. However, there also exists a wide variety of additional media options to cater to a diversity of different learning styles, and that can be in the form of an interactive slide, a explanatory movie, or some of the various labeled diagrams or dissection images to help create a more holistic learning experience that best suits your preferred learning style. Additionally, Primal will allow you to translate your knowledge from theory to practice through the use of a variety of different pieces of information, such as case studies, interactive learning activities, as well as a variety of quizzes, as well as downloadable case studies. Now, Primal serves as a web-based application. And for those of you who might be having some issues accessing the platform, I do advise that you speak to your local librarian over at the university, or in this case, the private health college, depending on where you might be based, to assist with how to access the platform. Now, for your particular institution, whether or not it is set up with IP authentication or username and password, that is completely dependent on your institution, and you would have to speak to your particular librarian or lecturer to assist. Now, when on campus, what you simply have to do is be connected to the campus Wi-Fi, head over directly to anatomy.tv, and that will log you straight in. However, when off campus, for those of you whose institutions are set up with IP authentication, simply head over to the library database portal, search for either anatomy.tv or Primal Pictures, and that will log you straight in. Conversely, for those of you whose institutions are set up with a username and password, you can simply head over straight to anatomy.tv and input those login details. Additionally, Primal Pictures allows you some dashboard personalization in the form of a personal profile as well as a Palms profile. We won't go ahead and explore Palms today, but when we jump over to the platform, for those of you who have access to this particular title, I'll just briefly explain the differences between a personal profile and a PALMS profile. Now, there are also two mobile apps available for download. And what you would simply have to do is when on campus, be logged onto the campus Wi-Fi, head over to anatomy.tv, scroll down to those two appropriate titles, being 3D real-time or quizzing, select the appropriate store, being either Google Play or the App Store. That will then push you over to the appropriate titles, select the appropriate app, and once downloaded, hit log into existing subscription, and you can then switch off your Wi-Fi and data and use those particular apps offline. For those of you who would like the download instructions for those apps, please feel free to pop your email over in the chat box, and I'll be sure to send that over to you towards the end of the session. Additionally, if you are ever struggling, so Emmanuel, yes, we are going to go ahead and send over a recording of the session towards the end. So where I left off, for those of you who are struggling to navigate and find any particular piece of content, that's where we do suggest heading over to our social media at anatomy_sucks. And that's where you can find us on both YouTube, Instagram, as well as TikTok. And that's where we regularly post some fun and lighthearted content about some of the struggles that many students often face when trying to engage with the subjects. It's also where you can find the registration links to our future monthly webinars, as well as access to our plethora of crash course tutorials and previous monthly webinars focusing on various study strategies to maximize your potential for anatomy and physiology using Primal Pictures. The first title that we'll go ahead and explore when we jump over to the platform is Anatomy and Physiology. Now, this serves as your bread and butter, focusing on providing a guided learning experience through a spaced practice approach. Anatomy and Physiology allows you to create a more meaningful studying session through that all-important guided learning experience for the entire human body, encompassing 20 different modules across all 11 body systems, helping you to improve your information recall as well as your clinical application of this information from paper to practice. It's also where you can use a variety of different media options from interactive 3D models, as well as some functional animations and labeled slides to better tailor your preferred learning style. And it's also where you can download up to 90% of the content for offline use in the form of a topic PDF. We'll go ahead and take a look at how to do that when we hop over to the platform. Next, we have 3D real-time. And this is a highly powerful tool which allows you to perform a virtual dissection. This is where you can explore the full depth of the human body for every single individual structure that you can visualize. It's also where you can improve your identification and spatial awareness across every single region and create your very own customized labeled study notes or diagrams using the built-in tool. Additionally, you can also apply those all-important dissection colors to create a more realistic interpretation and challenge yourself as you identify different pieces of anatomy. For the 3D Real-Time app, which is one of the apps available for download that can be used offline, there also exists the ability to apply the AR feature. For those of you who aren't familiar with that particular feature, this is where you can go ahead and superimpose your virtual body donor or your 3D model alongside an authentic dissection specimen as you identify different pieces of anatomy. Lastly, we'll finish things off by exploring the quizzing title, which is the second title with an app available for download. This will allow you to recreate that all-important spot test scenario and challenge your ability to identify different pieces of anatomy across the entire human body using a more layered system. And as always, I know that is quite a bit of information to take into account in such a short time. However, when we hop over to the platform, we'll go ahead and take things slow as we walk through how to access and navigate the dashboard, the different titles, specifically Anatomy and Physiology, the real-time, as well as quizzing. And before we finish off, we'll take a look at where to find those different additional resources over on anatomy_sucks at the likes of YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Also, if you are having any difficulties accessing the platform, I do advise that you please contact your lecturers or librarians to assist. I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing my presentation and then reshare my screen over on the home page of Primal Pictures. There we go. So as I previously mentioned, Primal Pictures is a web-based application, and the main means of accessing the platform, both on campus as well as off campus, would be at anatomy.tv. When on campus, you would have to be logged onto the campus Wi-Fi, head over to anatomy.tv, and that'll log you straight in, provided that your institution has been set up with IP authentication. If not, head over to anatomy.tv and use the username and password provided to you. Also, it is important to note that those user details are case sensitive. When off campus, head over to the library e-resource database or portal, search anatomy.tv or Primal Pictures, and that'll trick the system by thinking that you're logged onto the campus Wi-Fi, and that'll take you straight over to the platform. So starting off with the navigation of the dashboard, Primal contains a wide variety of different resources, and you're able to search for that using the 3 different search options available that we can see on screen, starting off with browse, index, and results. But before we do that, we'll focus on how to how to customize or personalize your dashboard in the form of a personal profile. When you first log into Primal Pictures, you will be prompted to create a personal profile. It's not essential, but there are some benefits. So as we can see, there's a small little human icon. If I expand that, this will now prompt me to either create a personal profile or sign into my existing profile. I can then choose to select my occupation, such as a student, and my preferred specialization, being anatomy, or from any one of the other listed disciplines. However, if your discipline is not listed, simply hit Other, and then insert your preferred degree or specialization. I'm going to go ahead and sign into my existing profile, because what that'll do is then open up 3 additional tabs, namely my recommended, favorited, and recently viewed. So as this goes ahead and loads, now as you'll see shortly, if I go ahead and expand my personal profile, my occupation being a student and degree or specialization being anatomy, this will then push every single piece of content relevant to my specialization being anatomy over to my recommended window. If I jump back to all titles, you'll notice that I have favorited the learning outcomes for medicine. And that means I can then quickly re-access every single favorited piece of content or information over at my favorited or my favorites. Similarly, let's say I had been studying the night before for a big test or exam, and I wanted to quickly re-access a particular piece of content over in the cardiovascular system. I can then simply jump back to my recently viewed and re-engage with that content the next morning just before writing my test. As I previously mentioned, Primal contains a wide variety of additional media options and resources, and you're able to search for that using the likes of browse, where you're able to find any particular piece of content based on region, further expanding that to take a more focused approach, such as that of the head or neck, taking a look at those 11 body systems, your preferred media option being an explanatory video, movie, interactive 3D model, label, diagram, or slide, or some of the functional animations, or the various titles available to you at your institution. Don't be alarmed if there are quite a few titles that aren't available to you at your institution. That is just because I am logged into my sales account, and that's why I have access to every single title, such as you can see over on the far left. For index, this just functions very similarly to that of a conventional textbook and allows you to sift through the different media types or the different titles available to you to find any particular piece of content of interest. However, it can be quite difficult to navigate if you're not too familiar with how to use this particular style. And that's why I would suggest you hop over to the result option, because this will allow you to take a more focused approach when searching for an exact piece of information. If I went over to the lungs, for example, and then wanted to also take a look at an associated structure, such as the diaphragm. What you may have noticed is that my result has pushed every single piece of content in terms of media type as well as title or product over to my result pane. And this will allow me to select my preferred media option that best caters to my preferred learning style or what I might be exploring in preparation for my test or assignment. If I now jump back to the dashboard, let's now go ahead and explore those three different titles that we'll be taking a look at, starting off with Anatomy and Physiology. We'll go ahead and briefly just touch on what this title is once again. Anatomy and Physiology will serve as your virtual textbook by marrying together these two subjects and teaching it to you in a guided manner, presenting the content in a spaced practice approach. For today's example, we'll go ahead and stick to the trend of the of either the muscular system or the respiratory system. The second title that we'll go ahead and explore is 3D real time. And this is where you're able to go ahead and create your very own customized label diagrams, interactive 3D model, and increase your identification and spatial awareness for any particular individual structure that you can visualize on your 3D model. And lastly, we'll finish things off by exploring quizzing. We will recreate that all-important spot test scenario and take a look at how we can use that layering system to further our understanding and identification of different anatomical structures. Now, as anatomists, let's go ahead and briefly orientate ourselves. On the far left, we'll have the various menu options available to us, starting off with the different topics or lesson plans that have been broken down systematically, starting off with an introduction, followed by the associated macroanatomy, microanatomy, and the relevant physiological processes specific to the respiratory system in this case. In the center, we'll have our media option, in this case being an interactive 3D model. And on the far right-hand side, that's where we'll have the various learning objectives that we would have to complete throughout our spaced or guided learning practice for this particular system, together with the explanatory information, which will help us guide our learning through each of those different topics. For today's example, let's go ahead and use the upper respiratory tract. Now, for our interactive 3D model, using our up and down arrow, we can add and remove different layers of anatomy. Here we go, taking a look at some of the muscles associated with the tongue, as well as completely rotate our model a full 360 degrees to appreciate and identify different pieces of anatomy from our preferred angle. However, if you wanted to take a more focused approach and then guide our learning, here we can explore the first learning objective, which focuses on identifying the hard and soft palate, as well as some of the structures associated with the nasal cavity. And for each of the pre-made models, if we simply select those, it'll then restart our 3D model over on the associated pieces of anatomy that we would have to focus on for this particular learning objective. Starting off with the superior nasal concha, middle nasal concha, and then the inferior nasal concha, we can use our explanatory information to get a better understanding as we guide our learning for each of these particular structures associated with the nasal cavity. And once we've completed that, we'd then be greeted to test our understanding and recall capabilities in the form of an interactive learning activity. These can vary in the form of either a click the structure or an interactive quiz. Just to show you what this would look like, here with our first example, with our click the structure, we're being prompted to identify some of those different structures that we previously took a look at. However, for the quizzes, this is where you're able to test your recall capabilities and apply your information more critically. Here we can see with our first example, we're being prompted to choose or circle the position of the inferior nasal concha. Let's say we weren't too sure about where this was, and we were to select this particular example. Obviously, we would know that would be incorrect. So let's go ahead and select this particular example and hit submit. And here we can see, unfortunately, we were incorrect in identifying this particular example, and we're provided with the necessary feedback. Now, you're also able to visualize any particular piece of anatomy through the use of some authentic dissection images. Now, these can be quite graphic. So for those of you who are not familiar with this particular type of content, it can be quite difficult initially. However, here you're able to visualize that exact same piece of anatomy that we previously explored over the nasal cavity, using that exact same level of interactivity, very similar to what we saw in our interactive 3D model, where every single visible structure can be highlighted and we're then provided with a role of a label, providing us with the name for that structure. And using our explanatory information, we can once again guide our learning as we take a more focused approach. Next, we'll go ahead and explore some of the different menu options, starting off with AZ. This is where you'll have your alphabetical index once again that will allow you to sift through some of the different menu options and find any particular piece of information throughout the particular system. Over at the beaker icon, this is where you'll have a full list of interactive learning activities for each of those different topics or lesson plans. For the light bulb icon, this is where you'll have a full comprehensive list of quizzes to test your understanding and recall capabilities. And towards the end, you'll get a full comprehensive overview encompassing every single question. And once again, these quizzes will provide you with feedback about whether or not you were correct or incorrect, and then prompt you to either return to a particular topic or lesson plan to then re-engage and further your understanding or comprehension. Now, I'm sure that you would agree, unfortunately, this information wouldn't be quite relevant if you couldn't apply it from theory towards practical application. And that is where Primal has added three very important categories in the form of its clinical correlates over here at the little heart icon. Starting off with the different clinical examples, then heading over to aging-related information for this particular system, and finishing things off with those all-important case studies. For our first example, here we can see we're focusing on lung cancer, and this will provide us with a nice little overview for this condition, as well as the associated causes, symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment. Then I'm sure there are many of you who may have older grandparents or parents that unfortunately suffer from some age-related, some age-related conditions associated with this particular system. And this will just help you, and this will just provide you with some more insight into the relevant changes that may be affected to the to this particular system as a result of aging. And then forcing yourself to think even more critically. We then have those all-important case studies. And this is where you can really test your comprehension and understanding of being able to apply your information from a theory-based practice towards a practical application. And what you'd first be greeted with is a short little scenario. For example, here we have a patient suffering from COPD. Now, knowing that this patient is a smoker, we can then use our understanding about the relevant anatomy that will be affected as a result of this, of this patient's particular condition in order to answer each of the different questions that will later affect this individual's anatomy and physiology. Next, if I jump over to the star icon, what I want you to note, this particular sentence, because I'm logged into my personal profile, any particular piece of content that I save or favorite will now be stored to the cloud, which will allow me to access that saved or favorited content from any device, be it my personal PC or smartphone. If I were not logged onto my personal profile, I can then only access that saved or favorited content from the original device that I've previously saved it on. So for those of you who do make use of the computer labs at your institution, please make sure that for any saved or favorited content that you are logged onto your personal profile. You can then also simply share the content as a link, the embed function, which is more suitable to that of your lectures. However, this is where many of you will most likely benefit from, and that's the ability to save and favorite the content for offline use. As I previously mentioned, you can save or download 90% of the content for offline use in the form of a topic PDF. If I jump to an example of the nasal cavity once again, and save this particular piece of information as a topic PDF, this will then merge those 3D models in a 2D aspect together with every single relevant piece of information specific to that particular topic. And now I can use this content offline at my own leisure as part of my customized study notes. Next, let's go ahead and jump over into 3D real time. And we'll stick along the trend of the respiratory system by hopping over into the thorax. Let's go ahead and orientate ourselves once again. On the far left, we'll have the different menu options. In the center, we'll have our virtual dissection table with our 3D model, or in this case, our 3D body donor. Down below, we'll have our various virtual dissection tools that we'll take a look at shortly. And on the far right-hand side, that's where we'll have the different categories to select from in order to create our very own customized 3D model. I'm going to go ahead and clear my dissection table for the moment, and then take a look at adding in some organs to create my very own customized 3D model. I'm not going to go ahead and make a very detailed model in the interest of saving time, but more so show you that you are able to select or break down your particular model down to the level of every individual structure. So as I expand further, I could take a more focused approach, focusing on just the various bronchi, or taking a look at simply the particular bronchial cartilage, the particular bronchial cartilages, or the left or right. Also, there are some pre-made layers that will allow you to add different tissue depths. Let's go ahead and toss in the heart as well, just to beef up our model slightly. Now you're able to completely rotate your model a full 360 degrees to appreciate any particular piece of anatomy from any angle. And this will then further test your understanding of how to identify different pieces of anatomy from any particular angle. The main standout feature about 3D real-time is where you're able to test your recall capabilities as well as your spatial awareness for these different structures. Now, for any one of the visible structures, once again, if you simply select that, it'll highlight the appropriate structure and provide you with the name in the form of a rollover label. But if you wanted to gain some more context, if we jump to the menu and select the text box, this is where we'll get all the relevant information for the superior lobe of the right lung. And for any one of the highlighted structures, such as the middle lobe or the inferior lobe, it'll highlight the appropriate structure and then test our understanding about the spatial, relationships between the superior lobe, the middle lobe, as well as the inferior lobe, as well as add in the relevant blood supply for those particular lobes. If I then jump to the window icon, this is where we'll have the different dissection images, as well as some of the pre-made layers. I do suggest that you go ahead and play around with the pre-made layers because it can be quite difficult to create your very own customized model when you're not too used to using this particular title. As an example, let's go ahead and take a look at the superior aspect of the diaphragm. I'm going to go ahead and half maximize my model. And here we have our dissection image alongside our interactive 3D model or digital twin. And for any one of the visible structures on either our 3D model or dissection image, if we go ahead and select that, it'll then highlight the appropriate structure. And this will force you to think more critically about how to identify some of those different structures when you interact with some authentic dissection material during your future dissections. Also, because we can't exactly see the diaphragm in this instance, that's where we can now use some of our different virtual dissection tools, where we're able to inspect and isolate the diaphragm, examine it by applying an X-ray filter. Let's go ahead and hide the different pleura. And now we can see, since we've removed or virtually dissected that particular piece of anatomy, we can now engage with the likes of the central tendon as well as the diaphragm. And if you wanted to completely remove the diaphragm as well, we can simply hit hide, and then all we're left with is the central tendon. And if you wanted to get some more context, we could simply jump back to our text box. Let's now go ahead and take a look at an example of the heart and lungs. Now, I'm sure that you would agree, unfortunately, the human body isn't exactly color-coded, and that can be quite difficult for a lot of students to often visualize when engaging with some authentic dissection content, very similarly to what we saw in our previous example. And that's where, if I jump down to the gear icon, I can apply the all-important dissection colors. And this will now force you to think more critically about where some of these structures lie in relation to one another. For example, let's say you were prompted to identify the different lobes. This will then force you to think more critically about which side you're currently visualizing these particular lungs from. Are we currently visualizing left or right? Now, drawing back on our prior knowledge, understanding that the right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2 lobes, this will then force us to think more critically about how to identify those different pieces of anatomy. If I now reapply my dissection colors, at the star icon, this is where I can save and favorite some of these different pre-made models. But more importantly, if I jump now to the pencil and ruler icon, this is where I can add any pins or labels into the visible structures, and I can create my very own customized label diagrams. For any one of the different labels, I can remove those names and perhaps change those to a question such as, what is this? I could simply remove the name. I could highlight any particular point of interest, make use of my arrows to point out any particular piece of anatomy that I need to focus on, or add in a freestanding text box, and let's say lung and heart. And once I feel that I've made a diagram that I can comfortably use to assist with my studying, I can then simply hop down to the camera. Let's name this test image. Not save that to my favorites. Hit OK. And I'll then be prompted to download this particular slide. Hit confirm. This will then pop up in my downloads together with all the relevant labels that I've previously placed. The last 2 features available to you is simply the ability to share the content, such as one of your pre-made slides, as a link, or your navigational trackpad that will allow you to navigate and maneuver your model in any particular angle. Let's go ahead and finish things off by exploring quizzing. Before we go ahead and explore quizzing, what you might have noticed is that both the likes of anatomy and physiology, 3D real-time, as well as quizzing have very different user interfaces. The main reason why we chose to explore these 3 different titles is to show you that Primal does contain 3 different user interfaces. However, once you're able to master anatomy and physiology, the likes of both 3D Atlas, Disease and Conditions, as well as a variety of different titles that may be available to you, look very similarly. And that once you're able to navigate and master anatomy and physiology, it will be quite easy to use those different titles. So for this example, let's go ahead and hit the whole body. I'll then be prompted to go ahead and either change my region. Ooh, my apologies. Let's just hop back with that one. Let's just restart that. There we go. So I'll either be prompted to change my region or select one of the different systems. I could even go ahead and select a full mixture encompassing every single structure from those different systems available to me. I could then set my preferred question type as what is, where is, or mixture of the two, or my preferred difficulty, as well as set my preferred question count. We'll go ahead and hit unlimited for this example. So this particular user interface may look very similar to that of 3D real-time, with a few exceptions. You still have the ability to apply your X-ray filter in the form of examine, as well as to focus your structure. And using our up and down sliding bar, we can add and remove different layers of anatomy to expose those different structures that might be hidden. Here we can clearly see that we have the sacrum. However, if we weren't too sure, let's say we were playing a bit of a guessing game and we were slightly confident that this was the sacrum. Let's go ahead and hit that and click submit. We can skip that. And here we can see we were correct in identifying this particular structure. We can simply go ahead and hit enter and then hop over to our next structure. Here we can see once again we have two scapulae, but if this was particularly hidden, we could simply remove those different muscles, hit submit, and continue on with our quiz. Apologies for that. Just jump back in here. And let's say we got bored, or in this case, we finished with our quiz. Simply either hit pass or exit quiz. And then we're provided with the necessary feedback about how well we did throughout that particular quiz. And we can then choose to either start a new quiz or exit and explore one of the other titles available to us. Let's now go ahead and briefly summarize what we took a look at before we hop over to the different social media channels and demonstrate where you're able to find the additional media options available to you. We first explored how to access Primal Pictures as a web-based application at anatomy.tv. We then took a look at the personalization option in the form of a personal profile, which allows you to select your occupation as well as specialization. Following that, we took a look at the three different options that further opens in the form of your recommended, favorited and recently viewed. We explored the various search options in the form of browse, index, and results, before taking a look at three of the different titles, starting off with Anatomy and Physiology. As I mentioned, Anatomy and Physiology will be your main starting point, focusing on creating a guided learning experience this approach. We then hopped over to 3D real-time and took a look at how we were able to increase our understanding, identification, as well as our spatial awareness through an interactive 3D model using our dissection image alongside our 3D model, as well as how to create our very own label diagrams. And we finished things off by recreating that all-important spot test scenario, that multiple choice question-based scenario using the quizzing title. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok just to show you where you're able to find a list of crash course tutorials should you ever feel lost of how to navigate some of the different titles available to you. So what you'd simply have to do, head over to YouTube, search for anatomy_sucks, select the appropriate channel, and then hop over to the different playlists, because this is where you'll gain access to the variety of, the variety of different crash course tutorials, as well as the previous training webinars focusing on developing effective study strategies for anatomy.